Okay, so hello, I am Josh, the Dad of Hobbies, and today's hobby is the magnificent, wonderful, fantastic, soulful Carl Lumbly, who is, again, in my opinion, one of the greatest Hollywood actors, and whatever they're paying you, I'm sure is not enough. So welcome, thank you so much for joining me. I, of course, knew you way back in the olden times of Mantis on Fox, who has a long history of canceling shows, but you actually your career started well even before that show.
Yes.
And in fact, my understanding is you didn't even start with a career in acting at all. You started with a career in journalism and made your way into acting sideways. So tell me a little bit about how you went from journalism into the acting world.
Um, it was a happy accident, and that's the only way I can describe it. I didn't even go in sideways. I literally fell through a hole in what I thought was a solid floor of experience, and in that hole, I found, um, I guess, the meeting of um, writing and motion, which was improvisational, satirical, comedic theater. And I was doing a story about this company because they had lost five, well, their entire cast of five people to Los Angeles. And so I got there early and got handed what I thought was an audience survey, but it turned out to be an audition card. And I thought, what a good perspective from which to not only from which to write the story, but from which to experience the story, because it was kind of exciting. All these people gathered together, and you were given prompts and words. There was wordplay. There were all of the things that I really loved, and then this additional element that I wasn't particularly wild about, but I think the idea of being on my feet in motion, um, dealing with my story and other people's stories, whether real or imagined, was something I had done my entire life up to that point. Um, it always seemed to me that the point of story was connection. That, what do you do when you walk into a situation where you don't know anyone? You start to try and find out if anyone has a story similar to yours, or if there's something in someone else's story that they might be able to relate to in yours, or what is drawing you to a certain person. Sometimes you make up stories about people that you don't know when you're in transit, just to imagine what they are based on what they seem to be, based on what they seem to look like. So that idea of play and story with the with the end point being some connection between the performers, and an audience. That was exciting, and the audition process was therefore fun. It was something that I hadn't experienced, and I was comfortable. And also, I knew that I wasn't going to be part of this, so I had a certain freedom. And then at the end of the process, a few weeks, they had winnowed it down to the five people. And I was one of the five people. I explained that that was not what I was here for, and thanked them very much, but that I was a writer and I had written a story, and they said okay, and then they called back a couple of days later and said, we would really like you to consider joining the company on whatever basis. Our shows are one and done if you so choose, or if you wish to continue on, we'd be open to that. And for any number of reasons, Josh, in part the challenge, in part that by that point I thought I knew everything, and here was something that I had no idea about. So I thought I'll try it temporarily, and it will be one of those things that I might be able to uh, tell a child of mine or a partner of mine that, yeah, I was not always as you see me now. But it stuck.
As you said, you stumbled through what you thought was a solid floor. and almost immediately your career had a break. I mean, you got on Cagney and Lacey within a couple of years of doing that initial play, right? I mean, that's a major role, a major TV show, major network, and of
Right.
course you were brilliant as you are and everything, but that that is not only falling through the floor, that's falling through the floor onto a pile of money, more or less.
Well, it was, I would say that interval between doing Dudley Riggs' Brave New Workshop, that first improvisational comedy theater experience, and New York, when I where I was cast in the pilot for Cagney and Lacey. Um, there was a good deal of territory between those two, and it was mountains, hills, and valleys, and I was not looking to do television, except as a way to gain rent money to go back to New York and do as much theater as I possibly could. And in New York, one day I went for an audition, and it wasn't even a pilot. It was just a movie of the week being shot in Canada, so it would be nearby. And now, relative to what was going on at that time, for a whole bunch of money, like it was just uh, as it was a gig where you didn't have to do very much. You had to create a character as you always do, but it wasn't like there was a heavy line load or anything like that. And then, I was looking at 3, 4 months rent just in my hand. So did the pilot, and well, I did the TV movie, which turned out to be a pilot, and they picked it up for 6 episodes. Came to Los Angeles, did the 6 episodes, and I think it aired, and maybe 3 or 4 aired, and it was taken off the air. And I went back to New York with, the aforementioned rent money, and then began to ply my trade because now I was, in my mind, a working actor in New York. I was at the peak, and the producers organized, I believe, a write-at-in campaign. I don't know the facts, so if someone contradicted me on that, I would defer, but I think they had something to do with it. And in that write-in campaign, letters came pouring into CBS and urging them not to take the show off the air or give it another shot. So they gave it another shot. We went back out. I think we did 7 more episodes, and it was picked up and it became a very successful series. And at one point, they cast a woman, an actress, to play my wife. And I don't have a limited imagination, but there are some things that, I couldn't have come up with that. And it just seemed like, well, yeah, this works. So we met and courted and married and um, had a son and had a very amazing, amazing life together. And that, yeah, so that to me was the pathway um, to the door that was mostly locked, but every once in a while somebody would slip up and leave it open, and I popped through, and just tried to stay in the room. I think that's the story of my career. I just tried to stay in the room.
As someone without an extensive performing or theater background,
Yeah,
you do these improv, you get a serious drama role, you end up with some level of experience on stage, but now you're in a TV and film production. What was that shift like as someone who didn't have that vast education background? And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you get cast in Cagney Lacey in your late 20s, right? So
yes.
you're young, you don't have a theater background. Shifting from stage to screen, what was that like?
Well, I think it was easier than it would have been had I been really educated in what I was doing. If I had known what I was doing, I would have realized, well, I can't do this. But I think because of, for any number of reasons, including being the child of immigrants, whenever anyone describes something to me as being impossible, there's a part of me that says, I'm looking at it, I can see it's impossible. But if it were possible, what would it look like? And if if I can imagine it, then I can try it. And if I try it and I'm wrong, which has happened any number of times, Josh, I'm sure you can well imagine, then so be it. That was not the experience that I had hoped it would be, but you always learn. And that was the thing. I think not being trained as an actor was a deficit in some ways, but I think that deficit was also to my benefit because I was not particularly rule bound. I guess I was looking for help anywhere I could get it. So I looked a lot. I felt, um, in some ways, I felt because I was not trained that I was kind of taking the place of someone who was. So I should honor that and um, be cognizant of the fact that if I was in this place, I'd better be working and I'd better be learning because it is a craft and that's how you get better. And that's what I knew I needed to do was get better. Stage was something that I think I have whatever things, voice, physical expressions, whatever. And to project those things or to make them live on a stage is not that far from making them live in your life. The experience of doing on-camera work was something that I had to sneak up on because um, I had to learn to trust what was enough. That simply thinking the thought with a technical mechanism and system that will come and extract the thought from your head and allow people to see it. That there was such a thing as enough. Um, and so I guess what I appreciated about on-camera work was that in some ways it was subtler, but the um, but the required volume of truth was no less. And in some ways, it had to be more. You weren't trying to present. You were, you were more so just trying to be. And I think it kind of crossed back over into my stage work, and then it created this wonderful loop where I could always be learning and disabusing myself of the notion that I know. If I'm being honest, I still feel that my strength is how little I know, because I always have to commit myself to learning in every single role, voice, stage, um, camera. Um, it just requires being open, listening, which I think is probably my biggest strength. There's so much power in listening well in this particular business that I'm in, and I feel that that's maybe if I have a strength, I think that's a strength that I've developed.
One of the other major facets of you being on Cagney and Lacey, not only obviously was it a major show and a huge hit, this is throughout the 80s, and you are one of the first major black actors in Hollywood that has a significant amount of screen time, right? And I'm curious, especially coming from parents of immigrants. You were born and raised in Minnesota, but your parents come from Jamaica, I believe, right? Um, I'm curious if that if taking on a socially impacting role like that, where being one of the first black actors in Hollywood on a major show, did that either impact your way of doing work, or did you feel the influence you were having throughout the time of your audience?
I don't know that I felt the influence I was having necessarily, but I think to answer your question, I'll say this. I felt that it was important for me to be the kind of man as this character that I perceived was authentic. When I got to Hollywood, especially because there weren't very many of actors of color at that time in the role of prominence, producers and entities had an idea about who you were supposed to be. If you had my skin tone, if you were my age, um, and I came from something else, something that in my mind was not quintessentially American, but was essentially American. That was what I saw when I looked around in the world, that there were all sorts of people, and that you couldn't tell based on any particular feature who people were. It required attention. So I wanted people to see Pete Rinkson in that instance as someone who was familiar, but who they couldn't be certain they knew from a definition of popular culture. That I wanted my characters to define themselves wherever they were. And when I first got to Hollywood, a lot of people said things like, um, the old cliche, can you be more street? And I remember being assailed because I said, look, for me, street smarts is looking both ways before you cross. My my experience my experience is not in the street. My father, the worst thing you could do in my father's eyes was end up on the street corner. So I had to negotiate that. I also had to negotiate my own dismay about the narrow sort of aperture with which people of color were viewed. Um, I I won't call it a crusade. I was just intent on being authentic, and that would have to be enough because technically that's all I had. I think if you're not willing to be yourself, then you have nothing because you're certainly not going to be anyone else. So I that's what I had to do. And sometimes it was successful and sometimes it was interesting. Sometimes it was annoying. I think there were certain producers and directors who just, didn't understand why I didn't get it. Sometimes it was language. Um, Often it was the way I handled language. Sometimes it was, I remember people saying things, well, um, you don't handle anger very well. You need to be able to shout. Of course, they didn't realize that it made me furious hearing that, but I was listening to them as I'm listening to you. It just, I think I felt being authentic was retaining for myself those things that I believed. I didn't necessarily need to proselytize. I wasn't trying to convince anyone of anything. I was just resolute in being myself. And sometimes that was to my advantage. And, I would say on balance, it worked out, but definitely there were times when it didn't. I remember on Cagney and Lacey being told by a producer at one point there was some scene and I didn't understand why um, Petrie, my character, couldn't have this moment because it was in his expertise. He was in law school, pre-law, had decided he was going to become a cop, but still had that, and he had all this information. And the producer said, "Well, can't really put you in certain scenes with Cagney or Lacey because um, our sponsors in the South. We have to respect the fact that they would not be happy with that." And I remember understanding that okay, this is clearly a business, and just as I wasn't trying to proselytize, they weren't trying to proselytize. They were trying to do the best they could. So whatever sour feelings I had about that, whatever rage I had about that, that was all well and good. That was mine to keep. I still wanted what guided me to be doing things that I loved and doing characters in a way that I thought was contributing to our understanding about what it is to be human, which I guess is all art is really trying to do, remind us and encourage us um, and surprise us.
I think your reflection on Petrie, I think from an audience perspective, is well stated because he did come across very authentic. He was not a caricature. Uh, he was not a side character. He wasn't the um what's the term I'm looking for? Uh,
The lead or the
the laugh track,
oh
right?
yes,
Um,
yes, the comic relief.
the comic relief. Thank you. Right. He wasn't
Yes.
comic relief. He was studious. He was smart. Um, he had to deal with the villain from the Karate Kid as a partner. Uh, poor Victor. Um, he had a lot going on.
Yes.
The show was Cagney and Lacey, but Petrie was a part of that too, right? And you stayed on up through season 6, and
Mhm.
I think you came back a couple times for season 7 as well. From Cagney and Lacey, right now you've established your career. You are an actor, right? There's no going back to calling your buddy in San Francisco to get a stringer role, right? Um, I know that I'm going to skip a few years, and I know you did more shows. You did a couple TV films, but I want to get to the mid '90s where Mantis comes in, right?
Yeah.
Um, Mantis is sort of your second, I would say, major TV project, right?
Mhm.
Um, for those that have never seen Mantis, A, shame on you, and B, uh, Mantis is another show where you have a character, a black character who obviously still even in the '90s is not as prominent as it should be, but is also has disability, right? He's in a wheelchair.
Yeah, he was definitely differently able.
Yeah. Um, Going from a show like Cagney and Lacey, which is serious but arguably a bit lighthearted, to far more of a dramatic, serious show like Mantis. I'm curious what that shift was like for you. And then I know Mantis itself changed, and feel free to share your thoughts on that shift as well.
Um, Getting Mantis, seeing Mantis, the fact that Sam Hamm and Sam Raimi had come up with this notion and written it, I was very happy. I was very happy, very proud. I thought it was a kick. And for me, it was I think when I got it, I did not think it was going to be as serious as it turned out to be. Then, as I got into working on um, the initial movie pilot, because that one was set up as a pilot initially from jump, I realized that it was the surprising thing about that kind of fantasy work, that kind of super heroic stuff, is that as far-fetched as it might be, if it's grounded in, once again, this um, daily human mechanism of trying to do your best in the world, it could be very powerful. And it was very powerful for me. And, subsequently I've come to learn that it was powerful for a lot of um, people, especially uh, the young people, in my case, the young Black men that I felt I was also representing in a way that they had not seen. And that his heroism, while it did involve, capes and flying boat cars and an exoskeleton giving you incredible strength, and you know the the equivalent of a personalized tranquilizer gun that would, just stop criminals in their tracks but not kill. There was just so much in it. It was like a great buffet, and I just wanted to stuff myself. I felt like um, the character of Mantis was a vessel into which I could pour myself, and I would never have enough to fill it. His name was Miles. Miles Hawkins. You know, my, behind me, I think, is Miles Davis, who is my one of my heroes. Um, the idea that it was an act of violence perpetrated, we think, by the state that put him in that wheelchair, and that he could have been simply bitter. He could have considered himself defeated, but like many people who find themselves in a wheelchair, ending up in a wheelchair, I truly felt it was about becoming differently abled, having to call on things that you didn't realize you have, and that gave you powers in and of itself, that he was empowered in the wheelchair, that there was something super and superior about him in the wheelchair, which enabled him to develop an exoskeleton, a suit that would get him up walking like, quote, normal people. But that the normal people who were out there, who were walking around, needed help and needed to, um, in his mind, be brought back into the fold. If they had committed a crime, do the time, do the service, but not be removed from the planet, being given another chance. Um,
And I think that's it because you mentioned the producers, especially in Cagney Lacey, expecting or even stereotyping you as a black actor into certain things. Miles Hawkins, of all the characters I'd argue played, perhaps other than Isaiah Bradley, could have easily become the stereotypical angry black man. But
yes.
he was incredibly intelligent, and he turned that intelligence and that anger into righteousness. And as you said, he not only purposely developed non-lethal options, but went out of his way to try to help. A couple of his teammates, I believe, were former criminals that had been reformed.
Well, yes, so he had his fingers in many pies, but one of the things he did was he reached back to Africa, and he brought two African scientists. And in my mind, that was just simply source material, going back to something that is so original that it's source material for everyone on the planet who calls themselves human. Also, the fact that he was a man of science and a man of culture, and that his view of the world he saw himself and the people around him as citizens of the world, um, not former anything. Um, So I thought that all of that was in the text. But once again, I'm not making any of this up. This is what this was what was brought to me. I think that we expanded certain aspects of it, and of course the way I tried to play him, um, his power was about his unwillingness to dampen his imagination. Once again, it may not be possible, but if it is possible, what would it look like? And that I think I think that's what I was most proud of in the pilot, that we made a case for dealing with humanity in a more human way.
I honestly believe Mantis was just truly ahead of its time. I think a show like that today or even a few years ago would have absolutely skyrocketed with not only the cast and the level of talent behind it, but also some of the ways in which technology in Hollywood has evolved, some of the things that could be done
Mm.
to work within the show's confines.
Yeah,
But even though that show didn't work out, obviously you're not back in journalism, right? You're still
now still
moving
moving.
forward. Uh, and then a few years later, Alias comes along. Alias is a even darker and more serious show than the previous two, right? You going down this path here. Uh,
Yes.
where did your mindset with Alias shift from the previous shows? What was going through? And you've talked many times now about the authenticity and the challenges that you try to see. I'm curious what you drove from, or I guess what you took away from playing Dixon on Alias.
Well, I think if Marcus Petrie was new to the force, new to policing, new to the culture, um, Dixon Dixon was a seasoned hand when we met him. If Marcus Petrie was looking to see where he could be of use and how he could help, uh, Dixon already knew. He had been of use, and he knew and had experienced things that we didn't even know. He was just this repository of experiences and capabilities, that were inside that you got a hint of because there was something about the way in which Dixon was quiet and controlled. There was something about the way in which Dixon listened. There was something deliberate about Dixon. And when you wake up every day trying to save the world, it's so it's a sober presentation. Petrie was consumed with his own potential. What what was he going to do? How could he help? What was he going to become? Dixon had already become something, and he wanted to impart whatever he had that could be of use to someone who was already far and away um, as skilled as anyone he had encountered.
I love the comparison from Petrie to Dixon because you're right. It's sort of a beginning versus experience career, and I think the level of intelligence Dixon had, you could even toss in some Miles and some of the science and certainly the cryptology and stuff like that. But at the same time of you playing Dixon, you were hired to do the voice work for John Jones, the Martian Manhunter on Justice League, which are,
Mhm.
although arguably of equal or similar intelligence, vastly different characters.
Yes,
Not to mention voice work versus screen work, right? By the time
right.
Alias comes along, you've got 20 plus years on screen. You've got a handle on that.
Yeah.
Now you're doing voice work. So I'm curious what the process was like to switch to that, as well as where you drew from inspiration to do the voice of the Martian Manhunter.
Um, so Andrea Romano, who cast Justice League, had cast me in a couple of different things on Batman Beyond Good, and she had said to me, She was the first person to say, you should think about doing voice work. Have you done any voice work? And no, no, no. And so I'd done a couple of things. And then she called me in and she said, I have something for you that I want you to come in and audition for. And she explained this is a character that had been drawn but had never been animated in a cartoon series, and that he was part of the DC canon, but had not been attended to, and so they were putting him in. And then she said, I think the description was, and he's Martian. Um, so you know what that is. No, no, she doesn't. He's Martian, and he has been living alone on Mars. He's 900, 1,200 years old, something like that. And he's come to Earth. I thought if I was 900 years old and I hadn't had anyone to talk to, and I could read minds, and I was a telepath, that I probably didn't use my voice until I got here. And in communicating with people who had to make noise to communicate, um, again, it's different, but it's not my planet. But it's kind of like my planet. So a lot of what Jean's voice was about was someone who was learning to speak and learning to give voice to what he was thinking and feeling, and learning it again, having a memory of having that been, yes, that's what you do. And then this enforced period of of silence where even I don't know how Martian vocal cords work. They may be up here, but he hadn't been using them, so he had to relearn himself, as powerful and as amazing a being as he was. He had been unto himself, so he had to relearn himself in concert with these beings on this delightful, if sometimes annoying, planet. There's the episode that when I started doing Comic Cons, and the episode that people come back to was an episode called Comfort and Joy, which was a Christmas show. And it was a very simple idea. Everybody's going away as best you can when you're a superhero for the holiday, and everybody has someplace to go except Jean. And so Clark Kent says, well, come home with me. And so he goes to this farm, these Clark's wonderful parents, and meals, and cats, and a small town where, yes, a green large person is conspicuous and maybe even suspicious, but this Christmas spirit thing, there's something tangible here. He can't quite put his finger on it, but there's something there. And then by the end of it, he understands that this spirit of Christmas, this idea of joy and a celebration of simply being, uh, it does have resonances for him, things that he's put away a long time ago, and it evokes from him what we called a Martian Christmas Carol, but what was probably just a Martian celebratory song that we had to make up. And so at the end of the session, after we had done all of the regular voice work, the speaking part, Andrea had mentioned to me that we would be uh, doing a little something, just stay afterward now. It won't take very long. And then after everyone left, she said, so we're going to do this Martian song. Whatever you think Bijan would um, sound like singing this song. And having not seen it, but having read the scripts, which I have to say at this point, these were some beautiful scripts. And um, they weren't particularly didactic. They were just true to human nature. They were just simple. Even the pettinesses were so well done. That's the way people are. That's when people are working hard to come together, which is a task when everyone is different. But it's a noble task. And so some aspect of that resonated with Jean in a song of celebration and longing, which he sang at the end. And I remember feeling sheepish and oh, good Lord, and I'm not a singer, and while we were doing it, Andrea, as always, was wildly encouraging and directed me from her heart the way she always did, and probably had a sense of, about 8 bars. And when she heard it, she knew, okay. And so I think I must have done 5 or 10 minutes that seemed like 2 hours worth of vocalizing. And then she said, okay, I think we've got it. And I still, when I watch it, and I've seen it probably 3 or 4 times now, um, it's just touching. The whole thing is touching. But when I hear that 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 voice at the end, it's yeah, it's him and it's what I was trying to work for, but it's me. It's as vulnerable as I can imagine being on a stage or in front of a camera.
You mentioned you go to Comic Cons and people talk about that episode as well. I'm curious if at the time you knew that it was going to have such a lasting legacy, not only that episode but the show overall, to the point where fast forward 15 years, you are playing John Jones's father on Supergirl,
Right,
which is
right.
obviously, I mean, the CW shows did a great job of pulling in legacy actors and characters and shows all kinds of places, but you getting multiple recurring episodes as his father, um, it, that was because of how powerful John Jones was in the cartoon. And I'm curious if there was ever a thought when you were recording it, if you sort of knew what the legacy and impact was going to be.
No, there was no there was no thought of that. I was in a room with some of the most talented voice people you can imagine. And then when the guest people would come in, they were also just, massively talented, some of whom I knew from work on camera. So it was always to me this um, unlikely um, bounty that I had stumbled into. And and I would say probably, except for Comfort and Joy, I don't know that I rewatched or even watched many of the episodes, but I did read them. And because I am a reader, I just thought these scripts were so much more than I had ever expected, and more than I think people realized. And I think there is James Baldwin, who is one of my heroes, wrote a book called Little Man, Little Man, uh, a children's story for adults. And that's what I think. Um, that's the area in which I think Justice League played. There's a way in which we're there's a way in which I think the stories in trying to appeal to a younger audience didn't put that younger audience um, had a sense that they never had to write down to to this audience. And I think it just made for some of the better stories that I had a chance to see and be a part of, on camera, off camera. Yeah.
When you were cast as Sean Jones's father in Supergirl, now doing live action, obviously, how much of the work on Justice League did you draw from?
Drew a lot of from that Justice League work. For one, because I was playing my own father, I could I had to how to say it's like I had to unearth um all of those things about the character that were so beautifully represented by David Harewood, who was Jean in the live action. And then, because of his circumstance, he believed he would never, ever, ever see his son again, let alone leave Mars, where he had been imprisoned. But because he was a meditator, he in a way, he was always in preparation for this rapprochement, whether he knew it or not. So he could then just simply be delighted by what the universe had brought to them, and this opportunity to see how this boy had grown into a man, and to experience him doing the kind of work, spiritual work, that M.A.N.T.I.S did on Mars, holding a space for what's right and righteous, and what uplifts beings, humans and otherwise. Yeah. So it was a joy. I also think that was the other aspect of it, discovering again, in his own son, truly Martian, what it is to be human. And that there's a translation that Jean has been able to do, that M.A.N.T.I.S is just coming into, and on this wacky little planet with its uh, brown liquid that coffee. I remember coffee. Yes, that it was a decision to find something that was truly spectacular. And for M.A.N.T.I.S, coffee, different flavors, put milk in it, put sugar in it, whip it, frappe it, whatever a frappe is, um, lap it, drink copious amounts of it, go anywhere, stay up all day, all night. Um, this was a good thing. So coffee became, um, we don't have this on Mars. And what else don't we have? Well, what other miracles of being exist on this planet? And look at all my son is conversant with that I know nothing about. And for the longest time, M.A.N.T.I.S was, the wisest one. He was steeped in the traditions, and he was a man of spirit, and he held together Mars' history, and it was all in him. He was a repository. And then to see that his son was essentially miles, light years ahead of him, and but doing the same work, had come from the same tradition, had come from the same blood. Um, and the poignant thing about it was to be given this gift, just as his own resources were tailing off. And I think I loved I loved the vulnerability of it. I loved the fact that so many people could relate to this particular tragedy, um, and maybe see it as, yes, um, tragic, but an opportunity, if there is such a thing as a tragic opportunity. And I think very often that is how it turns out, the things that you are devastated by contain so much information. And once you get past the kind of blinding hurt, you can find um, you can find new entries and new portals to your own life.
After being cast as Marin on Supergirl, playing several years of that character, now you are cast as Isaiah Bradley in the MCU, which is not only a legacy character in the concept of the comics, and has had this hidden past and sort of the secret history, but is very reflective of actual true American history in the way that soldiers, and especially black soldiers, were treated. And Isaiah Bradley getting to come both into the show on Disney Plus and then the film as well. Uh, I'm curious what that experience was like for you, getting cast in not only a major, you know, movie level franchise like the MCU, but that particular role.
I was very proud. I was first, I was very excited. I mean, I'm I'm um, I'm not unaware of what goes on in our culture. So um, even as a even as a DC um, entry, I know the Marvel world. I'd seen a couple of the Marvel films, and I think I probably had an understanding of it as kind of a bit of a cultural phenomenon where somebody had the bright idea of doing what we did with Justice League and bringing stories from these worlds of uh, fantasy and imagination, and making them apply to us. And so I thought, yeah, it's good. I guess I might not have appreciated just how big the Marvel universe has become, and how in the comic world they tackled things that could not be tackled in other ways, and their target audience was young people. Now, as it happens, young people who started off loving comic books continue to love them as they get older. So now these things can speak to everyone. And this particular story, this 7-part story called Truth, Black, White, Red. Yeah, yes, 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 that's the one. Um, that it was a very brave thing for Marvel to do. That it was unnecessary. They didn't have to do it. That it was not just imaginative, but I felt it was driven by a sense of wanting to do right by by a character. I didn't know anything about Isaiah. I read this thing, I was just completely taken by it, and I just felt really fortunate that I would have an opportunity to read for it, which I did. And I think because it was emotional for me, there was something that I could not shut out of my audition. And happy accident, it might have been the very thing that I needed, because I ended up getting the role. At which point I had to confront in my own mind how to play this character who had been betrayed on a level that it was just impossible to imagine, had been defamed, accused of theft, not only imprisoned, but experimented on for decades, essentially because I couldn't figure out why something that had killed everybody else had not killed him. And they were willing to do whatever they could, including if somebody had to die trying, which would have been Isaiah. So when I read it and I realized that he had found his way out and he was essentially in hiding, did not want anyone to know his story, was not proud of his story, was just trying to get by with whatever little piece of life he could still get, have his plants out in the backyard and a grandson to try and help navigate the a landscape that he doesn't even understand because he had been shut out of it for so long. So most of what I thought about Isaiah was that he had a huge world going on inside him, and that one of his superpowers was control of himself. The other superpower was love, which he had in the form of Faith, his wife, literally Faith. And then he had this grandson, this representative of his bloodline to try and help usher into and through whatever world this is. Not knowing that Sam Wilson was going to upend him and then exalt him. Not knowing, not expecting that this same country that had ruined his life and destroyed his world would provide him with an opportunity for a next life, another go. So while Isaiah is exultant, he is still suspicious. While he admires and has such admiration and love for Sam Wilson, he doesn't fully understand why Sam wants to be Captain America. But there's something about Sam that reminds him not necessarily of himself, but of his generation, of the young men who wanted to do the same thing, who wanted to remove all doubt about their love for their country, remove all doubt about their love for humanity, and remove all doubt about whether or not they represented humanity um, in any way that was lesser than any other human group. So Sam has opened him to the world again, and it's scary, but once again, it looks impossible. But if it's not impossible, it looks like what Sam is doing. And maybe that has resonances for Eli, and it certainly does for Isaiah.
I love that you've carried these themes through all of your work, right? And you take, as you call it, your authenticity, yourself, and either challenged yourself or applied through the notion of if it's not impossible, here's what it could look like. As we come to the end here, as we wrap up, I know that you've done work with Mike Flanagan, who has both Doctor Sleep as well as Life with Chuck, which is doing very, very well. I think getting rave reviews. Um, what's next? What is your next challenge? What is your next impossible? Where are we going to see Carl Lumbly come into our lives next?
Well, I don't know if it's going to be next, but the next thing that I have, and it's the only thing on my bucket list, is a one-man show that I'm writing about James Baldwin, who I reference all the time, has been a part of this is probably now about an 8-year endeavor. I did one iteration of a workshop version of it. And I'm going to do that. it'll be next if I can get it completed before something else jumps in. But if not, it's the yeah, it's the only thing on my bucket list. You know, Josh, I know how fortunate I am, and I know that even envisioning the best of the best, I certainly didn't think that this would be a 50-year endeavor. But it is. So I'm grateful for that, and I'm just going to try and well, I was going to say run with it. I walk fast with it.
Well, whenever that show comes, trust me, I'll be first to buy a ticket and be the audience.
Oh, well, I'll if let me tell you, you will know I'll be screaming that one from the rooftops.
We'll do another round with permission.
Absolutely, be happy to.
Um,
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you for your
my
time.
pleasure,
Thank you
Josh.
for all you do. Thank you for everything. And to those watching, thank you for watching. It has been a true pleasure with Carl, and we'll explore the next hobby next time. Thank you so much.
Very good, thank you.